Let's get acquainted with the interface of the Business Studio application. Business Studio is a tool used to design business architecture. When you start the application, you see the main menu and the Explorer. The Explorer contains the main repositories that are used to store business architecture elements. The Activities tab is used to present the activity model that consists of functions and processes. The Org Units tab contains elements of the organizational structure. The Functional Objects tab contains various repositories to store documents, resources, and data, as well as information systems and databases used to perform processes or support their performance. The Management Methods tab contains the Objectives and Measures section, where the corresponding repositories are presented. Some repositories are displayed in the Explorer. Others are listed under Repositories in the main menu. All the repositories in the system can be viewed by selecting the All Repositories menu item. You can display any repository you're going to use often in the Explorer. To do this, click on the Unnamed tab and select the repository. The names of the repositories can be hidden. This is done by means of the special option in the context menu. We will start business architecture design from developing strategy. Let's go to the Objectives and Measures section. To structure information in the Explorer, you can use folders. Let's add the example folder to the Objectives repository and add 4 objectives there. Similarly, we create the folder in the Measures repository and add 4 measures there. The cause and effect relationships between the objectives can be best illustrated by designing a tree of objectives. To do this, we need to create a strategy map. It is a well-established tool to present the strategy to the owners in a structured form. The corresponding repository is used to store strategy maps. The strategy map diagram can be opened either by means of the button on the Explorer toolbar or by double-clicking. This creates an empty strategy map. For convenience, let's minimize the tab ribbon. According to the methodology of Norton and Kaplan, the strategy map should contain the predefined perspectives or sections to group the objectives. Perspectives are accessible in a separate repository in Business Studio. The 4 perspectives are added to the repository by default, but you can change their names or add new ones. Now, we drag these perspectives to the strategy map. The lane size can be changed. Also, you can change the size of the header. Next, we add objectives from the Explorer to the relevant perspective lanes of the diagram. The objective shape is displayed in markers that are used to resize the shape. I will now add 2 more objectives to the diagram. In order to establish cause and effect relationships between these goals, you need to add arrows to the diagram. A special button is used to add an arrow. The second objective influences the first objective, as well as the third objective influences the second one. Objective measures can also be added to the strategy map. Let us now drag a measure from the Explorer to the strategy map. The measure shape can also be resized. In order to show that an indicator is measuring achievement of a particular objective, it is necessary to link the measure and the objective with an arrow. The arrow should run from the measure to the objective. Note that arrows should always be attached to diagram shapes. Always look for an indicator at the point where the arrow is attached to the shape. Let us now add another measure to the diagram and connect it to the objective. And we add 1 more measure. It is possible to connect a single measure to more than one objective. Now, save the changes. Once saved, the relationships between objectives and measures are saved to the database. To verify this, let's open the Properties window of the objective. You see, the relationships are displayed on the tabs. The strength grade property is defined for all measures affecting achievement of objectives. If necessary, the default value of this property can be changed. The weighted coefficients used in calculating objective assessment depend on the value of the strength grade property. Note that the arrow has become thinner. This is how the strategy map is developed in Business Studio. The relationships between objects can be created not only via a diagram, but also on the tabs directly. Let us open the properties of the second objective and add the fourth objective to the Depends on Objectives tab, making the second objective dependent upon the fourth objective. Note that the diagram property remains empty. If we select the Objective 4 object in the Explorer, we'll see that the information in the Properties window has changed. It now displays the properties of the Objective 4 object. Note that information about its relationship with the second objective is also displayed here. A measure can also be related to an objective by means of the tab. The diagram property also remains empty. Close the Properties window. Now, let's see how the developed strategy map looks like. You see a tree of objectives and measures. The different thickness of arrows demonstrates that the strength grade value is different in each case. The next element of the business architecture is the activity model. Let's create a new activity model. This is going to be a hierarchical model. Thus, we use the IDEF0 notation. This action results in two new objects. One is for the context diagram, and the other one is for the upper-level diagram of functions. Let's name the model. The diagram is opened by double-clicking. A context diagram is a top-level diagram on which the subject of the model is represented by a single box, with its bounding arrows. This is called the A-0 diagram. It sets the model scope, or boundary, and orientation. We change the box name to Company Activities. I will now zoom in and minimize the Explorer to increase the diagram area. Now, we need to add some arrows. The element palette is provided in the diagram window. The first button is for adding arrows to the diagram. Pressing this button allows you to switch to the arrow drawing mode. Let's add arrows to the diagram. The arrow must be attached to the box. Once the arrow has been attached, an indicator appears at the attachment boundary. And we name our arrows. Press the same button again to escape the arrow drawing mode. Now, let us continue creating the diagram. You can also enter the arrow drawing mode by pressing the scroll wheel or the middle mouse button. We are now adding the main outputs of the company activity. And we need to add controls. The arrow name can be moved. To do this, you should enter a special mode. Use a button on the toolbar or double-click on the scroll wheel to enter this mode. Exit this mode with a click on the button or a single click on the scroll wheel. The External References repository is used to model a place, entity, or an org unit that is outside the boundaries of the system being modeled. We have already added this repository to the Explorer tab. Now it can be opened easily. We drag the custom external reference onto the diagram. and attach the arrow to it. We add some more external references to the diagram and attach arrows to them. The position of the name of an external reference can also be changed. Now, I will change the style of the diagram to the style suitable for context diagrams. It has the bigger font size. Now let's decompose the context diagram. Select the activity shape and click on the Go to the Object Model button. I am sure you have already noticed that the open diagram contains the arrows that were attached to the activity block on the context diagram. We will now continue creating the top-level function diagram and add function shapes to the diagram by means of the Process button on the Elements palette. Imagine that the control arrow should control performance of two separate functions. We attach the arrow to the first function. Then we add a segment to this arrow and attach it to the second activity shape. The arrow segment gets the name of the arrow to which it is attached. You can see it in the Arrow Properties window. For convenience, this window can be attached to the right border of the Business Studio window. Look, the arrow segment has the same name as the main arrow. The input 1 and input 2 arrows are inputs of the first function. The segments of the input 2 arrow are inputs of the second and the third functions. The output 1 and output 2 arrows represent outputs of the first function. Let's add the output 3 arrow to the diagram to represent the input of the third function. And let us add another arrow representing the output of the third function and the mechanism of the second function. Now, let's clean up our diagram. We use the idef0 notation to display functions and the relationships between them. The notation is not suitable for representing the sequence of functions execution. To represent the sequence of steps, you should use one of the process notations. Let's decompose the first function and add 4 processes to the diagram. Each of these processes will be described in one of the process notations: cross-functional flowchart, basic flowchart, EPC, or BPMN. But first, we need to develop the current diagram. Objects can be attached to arrows in the idef0 diagram. This is done to simulate the movement of specific entities between functions. A single arrow can be displayed on the diagram and have multiple objects associated with it. To store documents and other objects, the Functional Objects tab has been added to the Explorer. Several repositories are presented on this tab. We will now use the Documents repository and add a folder there and the Document1 object. To associate an object with an arrow, you should open the Properties window of an arrow and drag the object to the Activity Objects tab. You can drag and drop multiple documents by selecting them while pressing either the Shift or Control key. An arrow segment inherits not only the name of the main arrow, but also the list of activity objects associated with the main arrow. If an arrow segment is to have its own list of objects, it must first be given its own name. The list of objects can then be added to it. Arrows can be tunneled. To do this, we select the arrow and press the End Tunnel button. The arrow triangle is now white. This indicates that the arrow has been tunneled. In this diagram, the arrows are still visible, but in the Process 1 and Process 2 diagrams, the arrows will not be displayed. In order to see what a function diagram looks like, let's consider the top-level diagram of the Intech project company and see how the Manage Human Resources function diagram might look. Now, we need to create the process 1 diagram. We want to describe the process in the basic flowchart notation. Thus, before opening the process diagram, it is necessary to change its notation. This is done in the Explorer. Let's now change the notations of other processes. The process 2 activity will be described in the cross-functional flowchart notation, the process 3 activity in BPMN, and the process 4 activity in the EPC notation. Now, we open the process diagram. The arrows that were attached to the process shape in the above diagram are still visible in this diagram, with the exception of the control arrow, which we have previously tunneled. Please note that our element palette has changed. Start and end events of the process can now be added to the diagram. Let's add a start event to the diagram. The process notations are used to describe the sequence of process steps. Let's add the first step, an arrow, and link the start event with the first step. A special mode has been developed to link the diagram shapes automatically. We use a special button on the toolbar to enter this mode. To link the shapes now, you should position the shape above the shape you want to link it to. The notation also comprises a decision box element. Decision is used to represent branches. Use the decision shape when you need to model selection of a further process step. Decision either represents an action that leads to the selection of one of the further process steps or checks the condition. If the condition is met, the process 3 step is executed. If not, the process 2 step is executed again. And we add an end event to the diagram. Two types of arrows are used in the basic flowchart notation. The first is the precedence arrow. This type of arrow is used to transfer control from one process step to another. That is, it shows the sequence in which each step of the process is executed. The second arrow type is the object flow arrow, designed to transfer objects between the steps of the process without transferring control. Now, let's add documents to the activity objects list of this arrow. In other words, process 3 must be started immediately after the condition has been met. The Documents arrow simply transfers documents to the process 3 step. It does not suggest that the process 3 step should be started immediately as soon as the documents arrive. The name of an arrow may indicate the status of a document. For example, signed report or generated contract. And the activity objects list contains the names of specific documents that are transferred between the process steps. Note that the input 1 and output 1 arrows are present here because they were attached to the process shape in the above diagram. They are displayed as object flow arrows because IDEF0 diagrams do not show the sequence of functions, but rather interaction between them. Let's add the contract 1 document to the list of activity objects of the input 1 arrow. I will now go back to the diagram above and check the properties of this arrow. You can see that contract 1 is now in the list of activity objects for this particular arrow. In other words, irrespective of the level at which you associate objects with the arrow, they will be visible in the list of objects associated with this arrow on each and every diagram. Let's have a look at the basic flowchart from the demo database. Note that there is a special shape called off-page reference here. It can be added to the IDEF0 diagrams, basic flowcharts, and cross-functional flowcharts. The reference is used to transfer an arrow from the current diagram directly to another diagram. And at the same time, the arrow is not displayed in the upper diagram. For example, the requirements for instrument verification and calibration arrow is transferred directly to the Manage Instrument diagram. In order to open the diagram where the arrow is transferred to, click on the off-page reference and click on the Go to the Object Model button. The Manage Instrument diagram will then be opened. Note that in this diagram, the off-page reference identifies the process from which the arrow was sent. Thus, the off-page references are created in pairs. If we open the above diagram, we will not see the requirements for instrument verification and calibration arrow there. To add an off-page reference to a diagram, simply drag a process to a diagram from the Explorer. Now, we will talk about the cross-functional flowchart. The element palette in the cross-functional flowchart notation is very similar to that in the basic flowchart notation, but with one important difference. The actors of process steps are represented by swim lanes. Both org units and some functional objects can be actors. Org units are stored on the Org Units tab in the Explorer. We add an org unit of the department type, and then we add an org unit of the position type. And we add Deputy Director 1 and Deputy Director 2 to the next level of the org structure. Now, let's open the org chart. First, you should configure the settings for a new diagram. You need to select the depth of the org chart tree. Select Maximum to display all org units. The drop-down display list contains some generation options. You can generate a chart where only positions are displayed or only departments. But we want to create a standard chart, and thus we select the Departments and Positions option. An organizational chart has been generated. You can continue adding objects to the organizational structure in the Explorer, or, alternatively, directly on the diagram. Special buttons on the element palette are used to add departments and positions. There are also buttons for different types of relationships. To add a subordinate org unit to one of a higher rank, I place the shape on the shape that represents org unit occupying the superior position. After I save the diagram, the org units we have added are displayed in the Explorer. A separate organizational chart can be generated for each org unit. For example, let us open the org chart of the CEO org unit. We will now change the settings. In the drop-down list, we select the Positions Only option. Once the diagram has been generated, we see that only positions are displayed on the chart. This diagram is generated with the association relationships. The relationships displayed here do not match those of the organizational structure. So, in the Explorer, we see that Department 1 is positioned between Deputy Director 1 and Head of Department 1, but this department and corresponding relationships are hidden here. Suppose that we continued creating our organizational structure using the Explorer and added, for example, the Head of Department 2 org unit. Once again, we open our organizational chart. Note that the Head of Department 2 org unit has been added automatically to the diagram. This is due to the Auto Update Org Chart on Opening button on the toolbar. When this button is pressed, the diagram is updated automatically, and all the org units up to the lowest level presented on the diagram are added. I will now close the org chart and add the Manager 1 org unit to the Explorer. Let's open the diagram again. You remember that the diagram is limited to the heads of departments level. The Manager 1 org unit ranks one level below, and therefore is not added to the diagram. However, the organizational chart can be completed manually. If the diagram has already been created, formatted, and you want to freeze it, the Auto Update Diagram button should be disabled. From now on, the diagram will not be changed with one exception. The org unit name will be changed anyway. I will now add Manager 2 and change the job title of Deputy Director to, and open the diagram again. We see that Manager 2 has not been added because the Auto Update button had been disabled. However, the job title has changed. For any position, it is possible to list employees. To do this, open the Position Properties window and select an individual on the Employees tab. Employees can be selected from the repository. You can add a new employee to the repository using the New button. Enter the last and the first names. Let's open the organizational chart from the demo database. This diagram, structured from the director down, contains both department and position shapes. It also contains hierarchical and functional relationships. An org chart can be created for each org unit in the model, and if no formatting is necessary, it can simply be opened and saved. This is done in order to display org charts in department descriptions. There is also a possibility to generate org charts automatically for all departments at once. Let's go back now to the activity model. Org units are used to set owners, actors, and participants for activities. I have opened the upper level diagram. Now, let's open the Properties window of one of the functions. Owners, actors, and participants are specified on the Org Units tab. Simply drag the org unit onto the tab from the Explorer and select the relationship type. When you highlight another function, the information is updated in the Properties window, and we can select the owner and the actor for another function. The list of org units is now complete. Now, let's go back to the cross-functional flowchart. Note that arrows from the upper diagram are displayed in this diagram. Cross-functional flowchart is a diagram with swim lanes. Each swim lane represents an actor of process steps that are placed in this swim lane. Let's drag the head of the first department to the diagram. The diagram orientation is selected in the special window. We can now add another actor. The cross-functional flowchart usually starts with the start event. Then, I enable the Connect the Shapes Automatically button and add the first process step to a diagram. Let's now open its Properties window. Look, the head of the department is automatically set as an actor of the step. Not only org units, but also other entities can be actors of process steps. Applications, databases, material objects can also be added to cross-functional flowcharts in the form of swim lanes. Please pay attention to the color of the triangle next to the button. If this triangle is red, the object will be added to the diagram as a swim lane. If it is blue, it will be added as an arrow. The color can be changed in the context menu. I will now add an application as a swim lane. An object can be added to a diagram either from the element palette or from the Explorer. Now, I'll add one more process step to the diagram and place it in the application swim lane. Open the Process Properties window. You see that the application is represented on the Applications tab. After we save the diagram, the application is represented in the list of actors. I'll add one more process step and then a decision box. If the condition is met, we will jump to step 5. If not, we will go back to step 3. And next, we add an end event. Objects may be attached to precedence arrows, but only to named ones. I now attach the arrows that came from the upper level diagram to the shapes of the steps. And now we need to change the diagram size to fit the drawing contents. We change the size of the title block and then press the Ctrl key and change the size of the page. Let's see how the cross-functional flowchart looks like in the demo database. External org units can also be used as swim lanes. Now, let's move on to BPMN. When you open the diagram, it's blank. Lots of new elements appear on the element palette. These include events, processes, and gateways. The gateways are used for branching and merging. You can now add the main pool to the diagram, used to display the main process chain. Let's select the horizontal orientation. I'm going to add a start event to the diagram and name it. It doesn't matter in what notation the event is added to the diagram. If the database already contains the event with the same name, the system suggests that you should use it. You can select whether to use the existing event or create a new one with the same name. Add a task, and the link is automatically created. We now need to add an intermediate event. The shapes of the start, intermediate, and end events look a bit different in BPMN. I now add another task. To this, we add a gateway, which is used to facilitate branching. Let us add a parallel gateway. If you have already added a gateway to the diagram, but then decide to change its type, you can use the context menu to do it. At the output of the gateway, either task 3 or task 4 will be executed. Gateways can be named. Just as the type of a gateway, event type can also be changed in the context menu. It is also possible to change the type of a trigger, thereby changing what causes event to occur. The event could, for example, occur on receipt of a message or on reaching a certain point in time, in which case the event will either be of the condition type or the timer type. We have selected the message trigger. Then we need to decide from where the message is to be received. Let's say it is to be sent by the customer. The customer is an external reference that needs to be added to the diagram. A special box is now created, which is only used in BPMN diagrams. This box is known as the collapsed pool. Let's name this message flow. Now, end events can be added. Trigger types can also be selected for end events. Let's suppose that after the occurrence of the event, a message is to be sent to an external process. Then the event itself will be of a throwing type, not catching, as in the case of a start event. Let's name the message flow. The type of tasks can also differ. Let's decompose the first process. Swim lanes can be added to a BPMN diagram, and they represent actors of tasks. The actor is automatically established for the task inside the swim lane. Now, let us go back to the above diagram and see how the objects are added to the diagram. Let's suppose that document 1 goes from task 1 to task 2. I add the first connection, select the appropriate relationship type, and then add the second connection. Moreover, data objects may be directly associated with the sequence flow connector. The status of the document is indicated on the Status tab. Let's drag the required status from the Terms repository. To display the status of a document on the diagram, select the Configure Display Properties option. We select the property that needs to be displayed and configure the settings. Data objects may also be associated with message flows. To open the Properties window of the connection, you should first select the connection you are interested in. You see the relationship type in the opened window. We have not selected this type. It's selected automatically, since there is only one available option. Note, though, that relationship types can be added to repositories. Now, let's see the example of a BPMN diagram from the demo database. Note that databases are represented by special shapes. A marker in the upper left corner of an activity box indicates the type of this task or subprocess. Now, let's talk about the last process notation. This is going to be event process chain. This is a chain of functions and events. When you open this diagram, it's also blank, like BPMN. No arrows migrate from the IDF0 diagram here. I have added a start event to the diagram. I add an EPC function on top of the event, and the connection is automatically added. This process, in its turn, generates another event. Operators are used in the EPC notation to split and join the control flow. This construction means that after the event occurs, two functions are activated simultaneously. Each function activates a new event. Thus, we have now created the basic process chain. Now, we need to display actors and participants of functions. We can drag org units to the diagram and add connections. The name of the relationship type is displayed on the diagram. you can change its placement. Data objects can also be added to the diagram. They can perform functions and be inputs and outputs of functions. Status of the document is specified by adding a term to a diagram and selecting the appropriate relationship type. To link the diagrams, there is a special shape called process interface. It represents either the source of an event or an object, or the process where an event or an object is sent. Simply drag the required process to the diagram and add a connection. For example, the demo database contains the conclude subcontract process. The interface here is used to represent the fact that the current process starts immediately after the select subcontractor process ends. The second interface shows the process that starts immediately after the current process ends. Let's see another example of the process interface. Here, process interfaces are used to show the sources of documents used to perform functions. At this point, we can say that we have developed the activity model. Now, let's talk a bit more about measures and ways of entering their values. We have already added measures to the database. Let's take a detailed look at the Properties window of a measure. The Persons in Charge tab is used to list various types of responsible employees: those who are responsible for entering measure values and those who update plan and actual values. To select a responsible person, just click on the button with 3 dots. The Values tab is used to enter plan and actual measure values. You should define how often you need to check measure value and define the value of the period level property. Also, you should set up a target value and a target date. Then, define the desired trend. You've got 3 options: maximize when you consider the increase in measure value to be a good trend, minimize when it's vice versa, and stabilize when you need to keep measure values in borders. The minimum and maximum values may also be entered. That is, the upper and lower limits for the measure. After entering the maximum and minimum values and saving the changes, we can see that an indicator bar appears on the Measure Values tab. The number of rows corresponds to the period specified in the status bar of the Business Studio system. It can be changed if necessary. Since we set the desired trend to maximize, which means that we want the measure value to increase, we need to enter the lower alarm limit. After saving all the changes, a red zone will appear on the indicator bar. The value of the lower alarm limit property is copied to the Measure Values tab, but can be changed if necessary. The lower tolerance interval is defined as the degree of deviation of the actual measure value from the planned value, which is still considered to be normal. I will now enter plan values. A green zone appears on the indicator bar. After entering actual values, a slider appears on the indicator bar. Its color is the same as the color of the zone in which the actual value falls. The trend property indicates whether the value has increased or decreased in comparison with the value of the previous period. As an example, let's have a look at the number of customers attracted measure. It measures achievement of the increase the number of customers and attract customers objectives. We now open the properties of the objective. Assessment of this objective depends on 2 measures. The weight coefficients have been calculated, and values have been entered for these measures. Thus, The assessments are calculated. For objectives, you set pretty much the same properties as for measures: tolerance interval, alarm value, and on the Assessments tab, you see the status bar and the indicator you are already familiar with. Responsible employees and supervisors are entered on the Persons in Charge tab. We have now spent a lot of time modeling the activity, and as a bonus, we get documents like process descriptions or job descriptions that are generated automatically. Just find the process needed and select the report in the context menu. And you get the document. The process description consists of a title page, a sheet with a list of changes, a contents section which is generated automatically, a terminology section and the abbreviations established in the report template. The general section contains the scope of the activity, the process objectives, information on the owner and actors of the process, and the results of the process. In the process inputs and process outputs sections, you see objects coming into the process with the sources specified, and objects leaving the process and their destination. A diagram of the process is also available. The process flow section gives detailed information on each subprocess. The document concludes with a section on the KPIs used to monitor process implementation. As such, the process description is generated by default, but you can change it using the report wizard. The job description or the department description can be generated from an org unit. These documents can be presented in the form of HTML pages on Business Studio Portal. Business Studio Portal is a comprehensive knowledge base containing all the information necessary for employees to work effectively. The portal can be accessed by employees from any device anywhere in the world. Portal automatically differentiates the access rights of employees in accordance with their roles.